So welcome to Nonprofit Driven. Our plenary sessions today will be live streamed to those in our network who could not be with us. Now this is the first for us, making Nonprofit Driven accessible to all. So welcome to everyone online. One small housekeeping note before we begin. For those in the plenary room, that's this room, please remember to keep your phones on silent and please do not walk in front of the camera. Is there just the one camera? What? So please don't walk in front of this camera here. Now it is my pleasure this morning to introduce Victoria Grant, Temi Agama and Anishinaabe to welcome us, to lead us and to be present with us throughout the day. Vicky Grant is from the Loon clan, Temi Agama Anishinaabe Kwe, traditional territory in the Temagami area in Northern Ontario. She is a member of the Temagami First Nation, a status given to her through Canada's Indian Act. I'm actually thrilled that Vicky is here because I've actually known Vicky for about 20 years as a community volunteer at the Ontario Trillium Foundation and through the Community Foundation movement. So thank you, Vicky, for being with us. Vicky likes to remind us that her most important roles in life are as a wife, a mother, and grandmother, and throughout her career, always has been a passionate voice in her work and in her volunteer activities. Vicky has always been and continues to be an advocate for more robust Indigenous engagement. She has served on foundation boards of directors, as I mentioned, locally, provincially, and nationally. She was co-founder and inaugural chair of the Temagami Community Foundation. Currently, she's chair of the Community Foundations of Canada, a very onerous responsibility. She's past chair of the Circle of Philanthropy and the Aboriginal peoples in Canada. She's a director. I'm tired already, Vicky. She's a director with the Counselling Foundation of Canada and a member of the Advisory Committee of the Governor-General for the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteerism. Please join me in welcoming Vicky Grant.
Thank you. I just have to sign in here so that I can get my notes up. Welcome, everybody, and just give me 1 second. I had it open and then it went silent. Bonjour, kwe kwe. Bonsoir, hello, and welcome. Victoria Indigenous, Timiagma Anishinaabe Kwe, Mong Indodin, Timiag Stovil in Dayanungam. Temagami Anishinaabe is how we defined or how we identified as a people before Canada, before Confederation, now, and we continue to. But I think it's really important to let you know that I'm an Indian under the Indian Act. That is still what the Indian Act says today, even though we refer to people as First Nations. I liked First Nations until Department of Indian Affairs started to use it. So all of you today will have heard that the government has said it is going to end sex discrimination within the Indian Act. I've had emails saying, congratulations, what a great thing to have happened. It isn't really that great. The Indian Act was in place to end the power of the treaties. So it is a discriminatory act now, and to take the sexual discrimination out of it just makes it more possible to the government to define who we are and this way. So for me, success will be when the Indian Act is gone and our relationship with the government of Canada is based in treaty and in negotiations and Aboriginal rights. I know that's a little political, but I think it's something that I really think we all need to understand. So sharing the fact that First Nations women now can pass on their status 3 generations is nothing to celebrate. We were a civilization and we had a citizenship, much like Canada. So citizenship is not based in blood quantum. And that's what the Indian Act is. It is 141 years old. That's 6.5 generations. One of the things I think about the Indian Act is my grandchildren are the or my grandchildren or my children are the 7th generation, depending on how you look at it. If we don't, for me, that signifies the real importance of moving beyond the Indian Act, because if we as traditionally define our way of thinking as looking back 7 generations to consider 7 generations in the future to make decisions today, I think we can all agree that there is some importance in moving beyond the Indian Act. And I think we can all agree that making decisions based on things that include climate change, the world around us in a big way is really important. Nonprofit organizations, driven, I love that, because driven to me signifies the passion, and the passion for social change, for making things happen. I think that is probably one of the strongest things we have in our country, is the not-for-profit world. And the commitment amongst the people who do this kind of work is always with passion. And one of the things that, when I was talking to Cathy about what I would talk about, or what I would say today in this opening, is how to practically work in the area of reconciliation, yet be grounded in the vision of reconciliation. And I don't think I can do a better job than the Declaration of Action. And what I would tell you is we have 7 things within the Declaration of Action that we talk about, and it is learn and remember. So educate yourself, understand the past, understand what has happened in our shared history, get to know people within your sphere, and then understand and acknowledge. So sometimes it's pretty uncomfortable when you're the only Indigenous person in the room and there's an Indigenous conversation happening. Everybody looks at you for some kind of affirmation or discussion. And most recently I was at a meeting and I made a point. It had nothing to do with being Indigenous, but the answer came back to me as I was asking about Indigenous people, when really what I was speaking about a sense of belonging for everybody in Canada, and how do we bring the urban, the rural, and Native people to the tables in the urban communities in comfort and with a sense of belonging. And so be careful when you do those kinds of things. Think about that question somebody's asking, rather than from a point of view of who they are, listen to the question. So really listen and learn. And then participate and act. And there's a number of things you can do is get yourself engaged. Know the people around you. So know your neighbors. Know who those Indigenous communities are in your neighborhood or in your region. Don't look beyond your region and think you have to solve the national problem or what's seen as a national problem. And maybe in your neighborhood, in your region, if you get to know, you can create partnerships and collaborations that will make a difference. And if we do this locally, it will affect change nationally. I'm going to begin with a prayer, and I would ask you to think about this as we move through the day. We're here today we acknowledge today that the Creator has given us many blessings. for so much fortune for what we have been given. We acknowledge that and give thanks to the sky above and the earth on which we walk. We give thanks for all that is here, the sun, the moon, and the stars. We give thanks for the beauty of our surroundings, the air we breathe, the water that sustains us, the swimmer, the flyers, and the four-legged. We acknowledge and give thanks to those who came before us, who brought us into life and taught us how to live. We acknowledge our children and those who will follow us. And as we move through the day, remember that we are gathered here to learn from one another, to share. So let's be open and do this in an honest way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words, Vicky, and I think they've really set us off on an important foundation for our day today, and it's so valuable to be grounded in our history and our past in this land. So thank you. Now, ONN, it's hard to believe that has been almost 10 years since the organization was first founded. 10 years ago, when the Ontario government first introduced the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, the act that many of us affectionately refer to as our founding and forever issue. It is still somewhere in the process, but hopefully moving ahead. I personally remember those very early days because I was at the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and I remember those early conversations where some of us were a little bit skeptical about this organization. But here we are, 10 years later, this wonderful room, so many successes on the policy front and in terms of convening across the sector, and really, I think we've proven that in Ontario we can make it happen. So congratulations to everyone who has been part of that movement. I do believe that ONN has been a connector that we were before this that we were missing in the system by using a network model, by leveraging the great work that all of you do in your organizations, by keeping the pulse on public policy, and by engaging the sector in working groups and encouraging participation in big picture thinking, and by simply listening. I think ONN can assure you that the organization has your back on these issues so that you can concentrate on the work that you do best. So one of the things that we want to do to set the foundation for today is that we're introducing a new term to describe our sector. It is a bit of a mouthful, but bear with us because I do think it's very, very well thought through and really well positioned. What we're proposing is public benefit nonprofit sector. You'll hear this term throughout the day. You may have seen our recent working paper that introduces the concept. If you have not had a chance, I do encourage you to take a look on the website. It's a really well-written piece and makes the case very, very cogently. What does it mean? For those of us who are not charities, the term nonprofits lumps together a whole range of organizations that aren't necessarily in the public benefit. So, for example, condominium boards, trade associations. I belong to the Institute of Corporate Directors. Is that really a public benefit organization? Maybe not. So at ONN, we really believe that in making good public policy to support our community-driven organizations, wouldn't be as effective unless we can clarify the distinction between public benefit and mutual benefit organizations. Recognizing that both types are important, both have an important role to play, but they're unique and distinct. So we do encourage you, if you have not had a chance to read the paper on the site, and please do give us your feedback. It is a work in progress, and we very much will value your feedback through the day today and in the weeks to come. Now, over this past year, ONN has been implementing a strategic plan that guides our work. And I'd like to just quickly walk you through some of the key elements of that, because again, this will form the underpinning of our discussions for the day. So our mission very much is about driving stronger recognition of the Ontario public benefit nonprofit sector as a key pillar of our society and economy.
I've always personally believed that no change, no real change has ever happened in society without the active engagement and or leadership in the not-for-profit sector. I can't think of a single issue where leadership has come from the government or leadership has come from corporations. Any real change has always come from the public benefit non-profit sector. Sorry, I'm still memorizing the new phrase. I'll get there. So our goal is about driving stronger recognition, and we'll be focusing on 3 key policy areas: our people, our financing, and our regulatory environment. Now we look forward to working on these 3 strategic priorities with our network, and that includes everyone in the room and the organizations you represent. Number 1, advocating for an enabling public policy environment so that the sector can thrive. And we strongly believe that advocacy is not a bad word. It's a good and important word. Thank you. 2, championing the public benefit nonprofit sector's value and influence to strengthen its economic and social impact. Having worked in the sector for 30 years, I regret to say that I'm still get depressed when I meet people in other sectors who still think of us as being a sector that's looking for handouts, when in fact, the people I'm talking to should typically know that their agendas or that a stronger community cannot be achieved without active engagement of the sector. So it's not about looking for handouts. They should be looking to us to partner and help achieve those objectives. And you know what? We'll get there. We will get there because ONN is right on that. And number 3, increasing the engagement and diversity of ONN's network to strengthen it and to positively influence public policy. Now, between implementing our plan and preparing for the provincial election, which we're going to talk about today, we know that the year ahead holds many opportunities for the sector. This is not the time to hide what's the phrase? Hide ourselves behind a bushel. Hide a light behind a bushel. Thank you so much. So this is a team effort. So thank you. We look forward to working with all of you in the exciting times ahead. And of course, as always in a conference like this, there are a few special thank yous for which we're very grateful. Conferences wouldn't happen without sponsors, and ONN is so pleased that we've had tremendous interest this year for many in supporting our work. So a special thanks to our leadership sponsors. The presenting sponsor is United Way of Toronto and York Region. Thank you very much. Are you using Peel Region yet in that title, or is that to come? April 1st? Okay, so it's still United Way of Toronto and York Region. Our lead sponsor, the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, thank you very much for your support. Our platinum sponsors, the Lawson Foundation and TD. And we would also like to thank our gold, silver, and advocate sponsors for their support. Now, many of our sponsors and partners are here today. Please do, in the breaks, head over to the hub, grab a coffee or a tea, and connect and chat with our sponsors. They're here because they want to hear from us, so please take advantage of that opportunity. We'd also like to thank ONN's current project and program funders, the Atkinson Foundation, the Laidlaw Foundation, United Way of Toronto and York Region, and the Status of Women Canada. And I think they're all represented in the room today, so I would like, please join me in thanking those organizations. ONN's connectors play a special role, acting as champions for ONN and providing financial support to ensure that we can stay sharply focused on our work. So we're thrilled that our connectors have grown over the past year. Thank you for your leadership, and if you'll forgive me a personal plug, the organization I represent, Sick Kids Foundation, we're up there. We were, I believe, one of the first, so we're very proud to be a connector. A special thank you to our out-of-town guests and a warm welcome to those who have travelled from afar. I feel a little bit like a best man at a wedding here. But people who came from Windsor, Collingwood, Chatham, Ottawa, Sault Ste. Marie, Sarnia, Vancouver, Sudbury, Timmins, Edmonton, Barrie, Peterborough and Kitchener, just to name a few. Mississauga, anyone here from Mississauga? Yes, okay. And a particularly warm welcome to our colleagues from Alberta. I did meet one or two people from Alberta who are here in the early stages of forming an Alberta non-profit network. So good luck to you. And I know that our executive director, Cathy Taylor, has made herself available, and we're thrilled that she has offered her help. Thank you, Cathy. Now, as always at Nonprofit Driven, we offer something new. So this year we have a social media contest. Take a picture with one of our sponsors and post it on social media, on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, for your chance to win a 12-hour nonprofit digital consulting package with Spark Rock. That's so timely, such a wonderful prize. And don't forget to use the hashtag. Is the hashtag up there? Nonprofit Driven 17. And you can find a list of our sponsors' Twitter handles in the programs that are on your tables. Now, as you attend breakout sessions, there will be plenty of topics that we need your perspective, or we need your input. So please stay active, share insights, don't be shy, be bold, as I said. A couple of housekeeping matters. In our effort to cut down on paper and to move forward on sustainability, we haven't published any of the speaker biographies in the printed programs, but they are all on our microsite, which is nonprofitdriven.ca. We have a roster of impressive speakers, so please check them out in more detail. The breakout session times and locations are in your program, and we have wonderful volunteers right across. I've met several of them. They're enthusiastic and delightful young people who will help you move along and find the right room. Now, we have not done pre-registration for breakout sessions because we've known over the years that no one ever really attends the breakout session that they pre-register. I've never done that myself in my life, so please go to the breakout session of your choice. It will be first come, first served. So it's possible that you may not get into your first room, but hopefully you'll find something else equally of interest. If you'd like to take a break, check email, etc., there's the Nonprofit Hub where the coffee is always bubbling. Please chat with our sponsors throughout the day. We'll convene back here for lunch and an early afternoon plenary, and then a closing plenary at 3:30. I want to say that, again, every conference I've ever attended, no matter when you plan the ending, people always have to leave early. Don't do that this time. Don't do that this time, because our closing plenary is so exciting and so timely. I was chatting with Susan Pickett. Where's Susan? Who's one of the members, and I think it's going to be a wonderful closing plenary. And it's very timely because with the election coming up ahead, we'll be hearing from people who will have thoughtful and good advice for us as we think ahead to how we position our organizations and our sector during the year ahead. So your task today, as members, actors and activists in our network, be bold, drive change, and seize opportunities. The sector is you, and the network is you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next two guests, and I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Many of you know our Executive Director, Cathy Taylor. Cathy leads the organization every day with vision, with integrity, with thoughtfulness, and with good humor, and we're so happy to have her in her role. Cathy will be in conversation with Tim Delaney. Tim is President and CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits, the largest network of nonprofits in the United States, with more than 30,000 organizational members from coast to coast. At ONN, we just drool about those numbers, but we'll get there as well. An accomplished attorney and policy advocate, Tim has successfully argued in the U.S. Supreme Court, testified before Congress, and negotiated in the White House. Tim has served as a partner at a large law firm where he helped prosecute the impeachment of a governor and led the firm's government relations practice. He's been a state solicitor general and later chief deputy attorney general and president of the Center for Leadership, Ethics, and Public Service, where he's championed ethical leadership and civic engagement across the country. You're really talking our language, Tim. Tim draws on those diverse experiences to inform his current work, helping charitable nonprofits throughout the U.S. achieve greater impact by identifying emerging trends, exchanging proven practices, and advancing their missions through advocacy on critical public issues at the local, state, and federal levels. Please give a warm Canadian Ontario welcome to Tim and to Cathy.
Excellent job, thank you. And if I might go off script here, not that things are scripted, the advice and request has been that you all be bold. It's something that we do in the States at our organization, is to try to be bold. And you really can't be bold if you're just sitting there. So if I can encourage everybody to be bold and stand up for a minute and reach up into the stars, because you all are driven to make a difference, and grab some of those stars and bring them back down into your seat, because we are going to rock the house together.
You're so great. All right. So we welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here today. I know everybody in this room knows how much work conferences and events are, and to be here on the day of, it's a real privilege for us to be here. And I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with Tim. Tim and I have now met a few times, had lots of conversations over the last 2 or 3 years about what's happening in the US, about what ONN can learn from. So this is a great opportunity for him to join us. I also want to thank him for taking the time. This is a particularly busy week in the US. There's a number of pieces of legislation that affect the sector. So for him to be here is a real gift. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
But first I'm going to start and ask you, tell us a bit about you and how did you end up in the sector? You're a lawyer, worked as a solicitor general, a big law firm. Why are you doing this work?
About myself. Well, I guess I'd start defining myself as I'm a dad, 2 beautiful daughters who are growing up and making a difference in the world, and a grandson who's getting ready to make a difference in the world. So, and for me, it all started when I was a little kid, and I was going to the local library reading biographies of our nation's founding fathers, and they were all doing things and making a difference in the world, and that's just what was in my DNA. I thought that you needed to make a difference. You needed to change things to make the world a better place for other people, and that's sort of been driving me. When I went to the law firm, I was, after graduating with joint degrees in law and public affairs, I was able to then work at a law firm on public sector issues, making private sector wages so I could pay off my student loans. But I was attracted to a firm where I could go look at public sector issues, and that's then informed a lot of what I've done since.
So tell us a little bit about the Council of U.S. Nonprofits, just to give a sense to the room of what your organization does and how you work.
Sure. The National Council of Nonprofits is a network, just like you all are. We span the entire country as opposed to one province. But the way we're structured is each state has a different state association of nonprofits. Sector-wide, small organizations, large organizations, from healthcare and arts to zoos and everything in the middle. And then what we try to do at the National Council of Nonprofits, we're headquartered in DC with 2 employees in different parts of the country, is we then reach out to our primary members, the state associations. We then listen to them on what's happening on the ground, and they themselves are their own networks. And so then they spread out even deeper into communities. And so when we need information to find out what's happening, then our state association members grab the information, funnel it up to us, then we look at it, try to analyze it, and then repackage it in a way that it is meaningful and useful and applicable as soon as we send it out the door, as opposed to, well, here's a 47-page analysis of this federal legislation. Who cares? But this is why you need to speak out now, and this is how it can affect you. And so we gather information, and then we send it back out, and it becomes more of a cycle where everybody is working together, and it expands our reach, but it also deepens our knowledge, and it's a system that's worked.
That's great to hear. So tell us, one of the questions that we had for you earlier that you and I chatted about was how the nonprofit sector in the U.S. gets their funding. And so as we were trying to figure out, how does the U.S. sector compare to the Canadian sector, we were shocked at the percentages. Can you share that with us?
Sure. We love our friends in corporate America who help support nonprofits, but if you take a dollar bill and you look at it, 1% of the revenue comes from corporations, all the revenue for the entire nonprofit sector. 1% comes from corporations. Almost 3% comes from foundations. We love them even more because they're there. But it's only 3%. And then individuals give about 9%, bequests are about 2%, and then 32% comes from government contracts, where we are working on behalf of government, going into communities. Government has found that nonprofits are more efficient and more effective. And so they come to us and contract with us to then go do that work. And then about half of the revenue comes from earned income, tuition, for nonprofit hospitals when they are not all volunteers. They actually need to get paid, and so insurance companies pay them. And so that's the traditional earned income piece.
That's really helpful. So you've had a busy year. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a bit of what's keeping you up at night this week. But before we get into that, what has changed since the election? Like, what is different about the work you do, or is anything different about the work you do and how you do it?
The work has changed somewhat. In the past, our board has recognized that our distinct competency as an organization is we have the boots on the ground out with nonprofits across the country. And we've then tried to connect the dots across state lines. So much of the nonprofit community traditionally, when you talk about public policy, thinks of what's happening in Washington, D.C. But using the knowledge that we have, we then recognize that, in fact, when over a 2-year period, Congress passed almost 600 bills. The state legislatures collectively passed more than 63,000 bills. The real policy action is happening at the states and I would presume at the provincial level, whereas most of everybody else, their attention goes to the federal, but there's so much activity happening at the state and local levels that impacts the work of charitable nonprofits every single day. And so we've tried to reframe how the sector views its policy work to get people to recognize that it's out on the front lines at the state legislatures. It's also been a function of our federal government has been in gridlock for many years, certainly 8 under President Obama, it was largely gridlock. And as a consequence, there was even more activity happening at the states. But our board recognized after the election that somebody needed to step up on behalf of the sector to get the job done at the federal level. We knew that there would be a lot more activity and that we would need to have more of a presence. And so what has changed is we're now doing, in addition to all the other state and local work, we're now also putting on top of that all the federal work of Congress and watching what the various agencies are doing. And so the work has changed somewhat. The other massive change has been just the speed at which things are happening and the chaos and the confusion that's happening at the federal level. And my concern has been that all of us are looking at, it's almost like a magician waving a colorful scarf around. Ooh, looky at all that's happening over here, while at the state level, and through the various federal agencies, that's where the real fundamental change, because everyone's looking at here at the magician's scarf, not recognizing that the magic is happening down here to make all the changes that are unnoticed and flying under the radar. And so that really has made our network all that much more important.
So tell us what's keeping you up at night this week. There's a certain, and it's very similar to what you were just saying about the magician's scarves. There's a tax bill, and it was like page 477 hidden in the tax bill, something that's keeping the sector awake this week.
Well, there has been more gridlock happening in D.C. With Congress not able to pass any major legislation. And many members of Congress, the majority in Congress, feel the heat that they need to pass something, anything that looks like it's significant, and tax reform is what they've landed on as their big thing that they want to change. Yet so much of this has been happening in secret where people can't see what's happening. Last Thursday, a week ago, the House released its tax reform bill, 429 pages, and totally changing the tax code. And so we've had to parse through what the changes would mean. And yet the bill was dropped on Thursday, and Monday of this week, they started holding the markup process, which is an open hearing where you can watch, but it's only the members of that committee get to speak and talk. So there's no public testimony, no public input on this bill whatsoever, and they were going to be set to finish their work today and then put it on the House floor next week for adoption before Thanksgiving. And so they're just ramming this through with great speed and little deliberation. Meanwhile, the Senate today is supposed to be dropping its competing version of tax reform, and it will then be working through the Senate Finance Committee next week. And so I'm heading back to then start analyzing what is in that beast, and then get the word out to the nonprofit community so that we can then try to influence what's happening. The challenge is it's not just the nonprofit community that's being hit, it's all different groups. So we get squeezed out. Everybody else feels like they're being squeezed out as well. But there's just so much activity, and having the capacity to watch what's happening is very painful. The specifics in the House bill that has been keeping us up, there are many provisions that we're very concerned about, including that it is proposing $1.5 trillion in new deficit. Well, a lot of people like the idea of cut my taxes, but they don't then connect that dot to you're cutting revenues, which means that you're going to have to cut programs and spending, and that is a direct line, but most people don't see it. So there's this call for cut my taxes, but not also cut my throat by getting rid of all these programs that I rely upon. We're trying to help make that connection. So there's that large overarching piece, but two particular provisions for nonprofits. One is a proposal to significantly reduce the amount of charitable contributions. They are in names saying we're protecting the charitable deduction. And so you can take a charitable deduction, but they are doubling the standard deduction rate so people will not have an incentive to give. And so they will not get any credit for giving. And right now, 30% of Americans itemize their deduction and make their charitable contributions and get credit for it. This is going to plummet it down to only 5% of Americans. So 95% of Americans will no longer have the incentive to give that they've had for 1 century. It was 100 years ago in 1917 when the charitable giving incentive was passed. And yet that's being taken away for 95% of Americans. And so the nonprofit community has come together with foundations and has been advocating for actually a few years to pass what we call a universal deduction, so that it's available to all Americans to invest in their local communities, to feel pride. But they're going to be taking that away. And so our concern is that that's also going to influence the giving patterns. If it's only the wealthy who can make charitable contributions and get a tax credit for it, the wealthy tend to put buildings up on universities and put their name on it, or a new art institute, or a new hospital wing, or something that's really big. They don't invest in local communities that's doing the local work every day, taking care of people in their neighborhoods. Who funds that? Well, it's Joe and his family of 4 that see the value of the Y or the United Way, and so they give locally. They can touch it, they can feel it, and they feel greater pride in their community. And yet that's being taken away, and we're very concerned about that, and hopeful that the Senate doesn't do that harm. The other big thing, and sorry to keep going on here, but
are you going to talk about the Johnson Amendment?
that is so disturbing. There is a provision in American law in order to receive tax-exempt status and to be able to receive tax-deductible contributions. We in the states, charitable nonprofit has to meet 3 conditions. The first is we cannot be paying shareholders or making any profits. Any profits or excess amounts of operating has to be plowed back into the organization or the community.
Very similar here. Yeah.
The second thing is we cannot do excessive lobbying, and the standard is actually no substantial part, and that get clarified, and so there's sort of a sliding scale on how much your revenue is and a percentage on how much you can spend. The third condition that was added in 1954, so we have over 6 decades of positive proven experience of this, is that charitable nonprofits, which would include or the 501c3 organizations, it would include all charitable organizations, all religious organizations, and all private foundations. So we would not be able to go out and endorse or oppose a candidate for a public office. And that's worked. And yet there has been an attack on that this year to repeal it or weaken it. And what they put into the House bill last week was basically repealing it as it applies to houses of worship, religious organizations. What's that mean? It means that televangelists could receive your donation that then they get to write off, and you get to be broadcasting to 15, 20 million viewers your views on for or against various candidates. And so they will be able to, what they're trying to do is politicize religion and religionize politics. Here in Canada, when you go into your houses of worship, do you go so that your pastor or priest or imam or rabbi tells you who you're supposed to vote for? In the States, we go to our sanctuaries to get away from all that noisy nonsense. I love my rector, but she really doesn't have an advanced degree in public policy, know who should be governing or not. And the notion of having, and here's the biggie. Finally on Monday, the Joint Tax Committee, the Chief of Staff testified and told Congress, or told the House, that this will have a $2.1 billion impact on the Treasury, meaning that there would be $2.1 billion lost because of extra donations being rerouted to churches. Well, when you do the math that of the 2.1, depending on if someone's taxable rate is a quarter or a third of what they have earned, that means that there will be an additional $6 to $8 billion sloshing around our political system that is not identified in terms of who's doing it, and will be then torquing the entire system of how we select who's going to be governing our local, state, and federal offices. This is, in my view, a campaign finance change. It's not a tax reform change.
And one of the things we talked about earlier is that you've said that the faith community leaders across the spectrum of the faith community have said that they don't want this. So, and they have aligned with the nonprofit sector and the rest of their charitable partners around advocacy.
Absolutely. With the religious community has come together, submitted a letter to Congress signed by 100 different religious denominations and organizations saying, no, we do not want this. More than 4,200 religious leaders across the country have said, no, we don't want this. Nonprofits and foundations came together, submitted a letter to Congress. More than 5,500 organizations from all 50 states saying, don't do this to us. Even state law enforcement has submitted a letter saying, don't do this. And yet, the drive to change for a political advantage is prevailing when everybody who's affected is saying no, 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 and it's happening. To me, it just reveals the real truth that this is not about the community. It's about trying to get some political advantage.
And that's just the last 8 days. Yeah.
7.
I'm feeling a bit better about ONN's policy priorities right now. I don't know about my colleagues in the room. What are the silver linings? What are the opportunities right now in the U.S.? Like, is the sector mobilizing? Are organizations coming together? Are they focused feet down on keeping the doors open? Where are some of the opportunities?
Right now, the entire country has just been under stress, feeling for a year now that there's so much division and pain, and it's just a constant drumbeat of stress. Nonprofit organizations in the field are very concerned, where's the revenue going to come from for our missions? And don't people understand that when you cut all these programs, you're not cutting, you may be cutting the budget, but you're not cutting human needs. In fact, human needs actually go up as various things are taken away, and that's putting a lot more pressure on nonprofits. One silver lining, if you will, is that nonprofits are beginning to understand that we must use our voices as advocates to come together. One of the themes of your conference, coming together to then learn together and then lift our collective voices so that we can have a say. It's our lives. It's our country. We need to be lifting our voices and having a say in the future of our lives. And the same is true here. Another silver lining is we've been watching for a number of years. Our foundations have been turning away from the work of organizations like ONN and ours and other colleagues in what's called the nonprofit infrastructure space, because we're not out there advancing one narrow cause. We're actually protecting the commons for everybody. And they have been reallocating their money from nonprofit infrastructure instead to foundation infrastructure. And so they've been building up things for themselves, but taking that money away from the nonprofit community that takes care of not only charitable nonprofits, but also foundations. And so when we are protecting the commons, it includes the independence of nonprofit and foundation boards to make their own decisions. We're protecting the tax rates for or tax exemption of everybody in the 501c3 community. And the silver lining is a couple of foundations are starting to understand, whoops, we have really missed the boat and we need to be recalibrating and protecting the commons and not just the narrow causes. And it's happening, in my humble opinion, at glacial speed. It's not happening with the fervor that it needs to. And if there are any funders here in this room, I would just encourage you, please recognize a crisis hits immediately in the policy arena. That bill got dropped last Thursday. Even if you had the ability to write me a check for $1 million to fight it, I don't have time right now to go out and hire somebody to get them familiar with our issues and everything else in order to be effective. I've never seen a grant for $1 million or even a grant for $10 go with that sort of speed. And so normally it's going to be 9 months, maybe a year before someone has to be put through a process of applying for a grant, doing all the rigmarole, and then getting it, and then waiting for the foundation board to approve it, and then waiting another 3 or 4 months for the foundation staff to actually cut the check for the nonprofit to get the work. Cathy and her colleagues, her other organizations here in Canada, they need to have the capacity to move quickly. And that means having the capacity to be doing some of this policy work in advance so that the people who would then be called upon to do it know the issues and know the network to be able to distribute it. And this is not a paid speech. Cathy didn't ask me to make this, but it's really a call.
Keep talking, it's okay.
It's really a call to our friends and foundations to say, we're in this together. And in order for us to be effective together, we need the resources to get the basic work done. It is unfair to have a small staff of 7 or 8 individuals to then be called upon to protect the entire nonprofit infrastructure in Canada or the US working 80, 90-hour weeks for a year on end. There needs to be more support for infrastructure groups so that the nonprofit community, including foundations, can be protected.
How many staff do you have?
7.5.
All right, so putting that in perspective, right?
Well, and so if you look at 7.5 people, they're not all policy people. 4 of us work on policy, and 3.5 work on all the other capacity building, organizational, membership, everything else that needs to be done for the nation's largest network of charitable nonprofits. We continue to be working on all the state issues that, again, are percolating up while also doing all this more gargantuan work at the federal. So it's an awful lot, but we're small, but we're mighty.
That's awesome. That's the same expression we use here, too. Last night I asked you in one word, how would you describe how the sector's doing? And you said, exhausted. That's what you said.
I'll stick to that. Yeah. And again, I think right now the American people are also exhausted from all the frantic pace, all the chaos and confusion that's been happening. The nonprofits are on the front lines, and they sense that, and they see the additional people come in. Wall Street's going gangbusters. Oh, that's wonderful. That's not happening on Main Street. That's not happening in local communities. There's still great pain from the Great Recession. Importantly, what a lot of people are not paying attention to is more than half of our states in last year had to go back in mid-year and cut their budgets because the states are suffering with lack of revenue. That means that when the states are cutting, then they're cutting revenue sharing with the localities. So then they're cutting things. And everybody's expecting nonprofits to pick up the slack and the foundations to then fund it. And respectfully, I don't think it's the job of foundations to be subsidizing government. I think that it's the job of foundations to be supporting innovation in communities, seeing what's working, and then sharing that with government so it can be scaled up. But it seems that things have been reversed, and the government will do one small thing and then say, okay, foundations, you get to start paying for this. And it's not appropriate. And some of that is because the foundations and nonprofits have lost their knowledge about advocacy for the last 30 or 40 years, and we need to reclaim that space.
Has advocacy been an unpopular word in the U.S.?
Advocacy has always been a popular word, but it's one that nonprofits have to stay away from, is has been the problem. We have in our country a First Amendment constitutional right, and I tell people we also have a moral duty to be speaking out with and for the communities that we're serving. And as we're doing that, we're finding that the 3 A's that nonprofits turn to for advice and support, the attorneys, the accountants, and the academics, are telling nonprofits for decades now, ooh, stay away from that. You might get in trouble if you do advocacy. Well, there are some limits on how much legislative lobbying we can do, but that applies to legislative lobbying. It doesn't include advocacy through the court system, advocacy through the executive branch. It doesn't include advocacy through the media. It doesn't include a lot of other things. And so we can do all those things as advocacy, but our 3 primary sources of advice are telling us, ooh, stay away. And I worked in a large law firm, and as a young pup lawyer, I was getting involved in the community, and I remember being told by the named partners, oh, that's great, Tim, you can become a rainmaker because all your connections, but don't let them do any advocacy. And it's a lore that gets passed down. The other problems have been foundations have been telling nonprofits, stay away from advocacy, not because the foundations are not wanting it, but because their own lawyers have been telling them stay away from it. And then the grant agreements say, you can use, this is a general operating support, you can use it for anything you want to, but don't pick up the newspaper or listen to the radio or watch TV because they might be talking about policy issues and we want you to stay away from it. I mean, it's crazy. And then the 5th group are then the nonprofit boards that are populated sometimes by 1 or 2 accountants or attorneys, and Cathy might be an award-winning prosecutor, and as everybody knows, she's on the board and she's really smart as a lawyer, but prosecutors never learn anything about nonprofit law, and it's just kind of held out that because she's a lawyer, she knows what's going on. And she doesn't know, and so she then relies on the lore that's been surrounding this for years. We have a right to advocate. We need to use that right and for positive change in our communities. It's not about ourselves, it's about those we're serving.
Hear, hear. Awesome. So you're working with 43 state associations right now. How do you find common ground from Hawaii to Alaska to California to Iowa on policy issues? And how are they sharing information so that they, if one of them's got an issue that another can help with, or we fought that last year, how do you find that common ground?
Multiple ways. First, we understand the value of coming together in convenings like this so that we can be building the trust among each other. That is the core to being successful, is having that trust. And building from there, we then have monthly policy calls where everyone in our network can call in and we're sharing what's happening. There's an output stage where we present what's happening at the federal level. And then we have an inkling of what's going on at the state level. And then we invite various members. We know that David in North Carolina has been fighting this issue for the last month. And then Linda from New Jersey does a shout out and say, well, that happened here 2 years ago. We tried this. You want me to send you some examples of what we did? And David goes, yippee, it saves me time. And so we have that forum. We also have a policy listserv where we're exchanging that. And when they're looking at their state policy issues and sometimes local issues, we can then start seeing trends emerge. And then when there's a massive threat, for example, in California, there was a bill last year that would have required every nonprofit that is trying to raise money out of California, and that would be not just a California-based nonprofit, but one in New York or one in Hawaii or one in Canada, that before you could talk to anybody in California for a contribution, you would first have to register with the Attorney General's office, which, by the way, it's not done for free. You have to then pay them to register, and then have a disclosure statement on whatever you send out electronically or on your website or whatever the material is, a disclosure that anyone who's being solicited has the ability to go to the Attorney General's office to get further information and blah, 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 blah. Well, if you're tweeting saying, please give to this charity, there's not room for that disclosure. So we as a network then coalesce. Our California Nonprofit Association, Cal Nonprofits, led the charge to defeat that. But to assist, we got all of our state associations to sign a common letter to point out this is not just about California, this is about the world you're talking about here, and look at the implications. And fortunately, we were able to defeat that. But those are some examples of how we share information, share support, and share past experiences.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. I asked you earlier what was keeping you up at night this week, but what motivates you? What gets you up in the morning to do this work? The alarm clock.
It gets harder and harder.
Coffee.
Actually, my addiction, sidebar, had been Diet Coke and 10, 15 a day. In late October, I was just like, nope, no more. So it's even harder to get going in the morning. But what gets me up, it used to be my daughters, and just trying before I took on this job to make the world a better place for them. Now I have my grandson.
He's 2, right?
2.5,
yeah.
And so part of my motivation is Harrison. But more than that, sorry, Harrison, is, I guess I would trace it back to those books when I was a little kid reading. It was tough having a Revolutionary War. It was tough cutting off ties. And they understood that they had a duty to make the world a better place. And so I've always had this sense of the Athenian oath from ancient Athens that we have received our community as is, and it's our obligation to pass it to future generations better than we had received it. So we're merely in this relay race of life. We've received our families, our local communities, our state or community, and our nation, and our world from the past. And we have an obligation when it comes to us to improve upon it, to make it better, to make it shinier, to make it function better for future generations. So I guess it's that sense of duty. I'm here for a reason, and Victoria's prayer alluded to, giving thanks for what we've been given. I grew up as a very poor child with 5 other brothers and sisters, and there were programs that helped us, and I just feel a sense of social justice. It's my job to go out and make sure that the Cathys and Tims and so on have a better life and a better path forward than we had.
Thank you. My last couple questions. What do you want us to learn from your experience, especially in the transitions over the last couple years? And what do you think you can learn from us here in Canada?
I'm tired, so let's take those in 2, and you can ask me the other.
What can we learn from you?
Yeah.
What do you? If there's a couple of things that you want to make sure we reflect on based on your experience in the last year or so.
You can never be prepared enough for the advocacy work. It can happen in an instant where you have to rally. I understand that there was a provision that was buried in a bill here recently where it had nothing to do with nonprofits, but it would have everything to do with how you function. And to be able to rally quickly was of paramount importance. Just like when, out of the 429-page tax reform bill in the House, buried on page 427, was this provision about the Johnson Amendment and trying to politicize religion. And so having the resources and working with our foundation partners to understand that what we are doing through Ontario Nonprofit Network or through the National Council of Nonprofits is for the betterment of our organizations, including foundations, but also recognize our view at the National Council of Nonprofits is it's not about us. And it used to be about our state associations until I arrived. And we then elongated our thinking. It's not even about the state associations. We love them, we embrace them. They're the heart and soul and DNA of our organization. But it's really to help the nonprofits. And then as we thought that through, it's really not about the nonprofits, which sounds really strange for the president of the National Council of Nonprofits to say, we don't care about nonprofits. It's really about the people and communities that we're serving. And I would just encourage us all to remember, it's not about our organizations. And when we're talking to policymakers, it's not about our organizations. They don't care. It's about the people and communities that we're serving. We are serving the same constituents and the same communities as people in government. And we need to help them understand that and work together to do that. But we also need to come together as a community. You had up on the slides earlier how many members of ONN you already have in such a short amount of time. A hearty congratulations. But you all don't have the policy voice that you need with those numbers. And I'm not picking on ONN. Those numbers are bigger than some of our state associations. I am politely goading all of you in the audience. You can have more clout. It's in the self-interest of your missions and the community and people you're serving if you pledge to yourself, and in fact, have a piece of paper right now and pull out your pen and write down the organization that's not in this room that you can reach out to become a member of ONN, so that ONN gets even bigger, so that you have more clout, that you have more credibility, and you could reach even deeper into communities. And then when you rally and you come up to speak on behalf of the sector, you have an even greater power and authority. So I put the challenge out to you all to expand the membership. It's not just on Cathy and her staff. It's really about you all and your self-interest and your public interest of serving your communities.
I should take you with me wherever I go. And what can you learn from us? What's happening up here that you think, oh, we should really pay attention to that?
Cathy kindly came down, as well as Liz. We have what we used to call a membership meeting or annual conference, and we've redubbed it as our network's learning confab, where our network comes together. We learn from each other, and we've tried to build this learning community. And so we invited Cathy, and Liz came down, and it was wonderful because I heard from them that they were learning from similar organizations in the States doing similar things, and so they were trying to import wisdom into Canada. But I had my staff members and several of our state association members say, boy, that was smart bringing them in because we learned so much from them. And then when I look at your website and I see some of the work that you all are doing, you're speaking the same language. It's the same issues. We're all in this together. And so I think that we can learn a lot more. And some of the work initiatives that you all, and I forget the terminology.
Decent work.
Decent
yes.
work. Hello, what a great framing and concept. And we've been doing some of that work, but that sort of framing is powerful. And so that's something that I want to take back and learn more about, and then really institute it even deeper into the work we do. And so that's one example of many. And that's why, in terms of our organizations, do you want to talk or have me keep going? we learn so much when we get outside of our boxes. I had a psychology or an anthropology professor. I learned one thing in that class. It was the worst grade I ever got, but I learned one thing from Professor Pospisil, who had won all sorts of awards, heavy, thick French accent. I was from Texas. I had a Texas accent. I didn't understand him. But I understood this. When you live your life in a red room, the walls are red, the ceiling and floor are red, the table's red, the chairs are red, everything is red. The spoon and forks are red. You think that it's your red world? You don't know diddly about red. It's not until you go over to the red door and grab the red door handle and you open up the room and you walk in the next room and bam, you're in a yellow room. And all of a sudden, red has new meaning as you explore the yellow room and go over to the yellow door with the yellow handle and you open it up and boom, you're then in a green room and later boom, in a blue room. All of a sudden there's greater understanding of red. And so when we can learn from you all, it's really getting outside of our box to learn and look at things from a fresh new perspective. And so Cathy and I have been having some friendly discussions. Are there some ways that we might formalize our relationship as organizations and recognizing, as both of us do, that it all starts with trust and having that trusting relationship? We've been developing that, and we are hopeful that we can find a way to make it more formal so that we can regularly come up to Canada electronically or physically to learn from you all and to open our doors and our hearts to you all so that our great neighbors in Canada can come down and take whatever ideas we have that you find useful and import them back into Canada. And in that way, again, I was talking before about this relay race of life and making the world a better place. We can deepen the bonds between our countries. And to me, we're all advancing our missions together and making the world a better place. And isn't that what we should be doing?
It's a perfect note to end on. I just want to thank Tim so much for coming here, especially this busy week, for sharing your insights with us and your honesty and authenticity about what's happening down there, because I think there's such opportunities for us to learn from each other. So thank you so much for being here.
Cathy?
Yeah.
Well, one final.
He has to have the last word.
Yeah. Which is, as an American, I want to thank Canada for being the best possible neighbor in the world. I say that from my heart. You all are a great nation, and I just want to say, citizen to citizens, thank you to your country. It's great having such important friends.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for joining us for our morning plenary. Thank you to the folks that have been on live stream. Now is your opportunity to have a networking break and grab some coffee and snacks. Just a note that the breakout sessions, there are 7 of them, they will happen exactly at 10:45 sharp. So please be in your breakout sessions by that point. Thank you.